This is the Q&A for our third session on the stages of dating. And we have a special guest in tonight's recording and present with us, the fabulous Danelle Bancroft. She'll be speaking from a microphone for the recording purposes, not for being broadcast here, because you can hear her fine. I have asked my wife, nice fingernails, polished. I've asked her to help with these questions, and so we're going to get right into it. I have the first question that was asked, well, that's at the top, is what was question number 6 in the 10 questions for all of you to ask? Wow, they're just popping fast now. I can't keep up. Okay, so just to review those questions for you, 1, is he or she clearly a believer? 2, does he or she show an evident love for God? Number 3, does he or she have an evident love for God's word? Number 4, is there clear evidence of Christian character? Number 5, does he or she show a clear regard and care for others? Number 6, is he or she faithful and consistent in the Christian life and prayer, Bible study, etc.? Number 7, does he or she enjoy the local church? Number 8, does he or she have the same view and values of marriage as you? Number 9, do you trust him or her? Number 10, do those who know you and know them think highly of this person? So I give all 10 because sometimes you're like, I'm missing 6. Oh wait, I think I have 6. I'm missing 7. So I want him to give you all 10 so that you have that. Okay. So now, man, you guys are active here. Okay, so I'm going to let my wife cherry pick whichever one she wants to answer. And you don't worry about the order. You can answer any one you want. What's the question? You got to read the question and then give us your answer.
Okay, this is weird because it's not doing anything in this room, but I have to hold it here. This one's easy. Thoughts on someone going on different dates simultaneously? Here's my thought.
That's impressive. At the same place, like different places at the same
Here's
time?
my thought.
I'll be right back. I have to use the restroom. So.
My thought is stop it. That's my thought. Stop it if you're doing that.
If I may.
Simultaneously.
I'm imagining someone might have met someone online. That's a way that sometimes people can introduce each other. It used to be like your family introduced families to each other. It used to be like your friends. It's a technology world, and sometimes people meet each other online. And so sometimes you're like meeting people online at the same time, and you're going on different dates at the same time. I'm imagining that. So would you have a different answer than what you just gave?
I guess the word I'm having a problem with in that context is date. Like, if you want to do friendships and get to know a bunch of girls at the same time, great, that's fine. But dating, like I'm pursuing you for potential marriage, if you've got your fishing lines out in 3 different lakes and you're waiting, then how do you go back and have that conversation with girl number 1 when you've decided on girl number 3? You're like, oh, just kidding.
All right. All right. What levels of physical intimacy are appropriate and when? It's kind of like the adult version of the teenage version. How far is too far?
You can answer that.
You want me to answer that? Okay. So similar on the category of emotional intimacy, so is the conversation of physical intimacy, where many couples are going further and faster than they should, and often with regret and with clouds their decision making on how to assess the relationship because they are enjoying that. I think it's Tim Keller in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, speaks about the nature of what it's like in having someone to hold their hand. And this idea that it's like this electric feeling holding hands with somebody. And you're like, this just feels so special. We're having this moment right now, and this is just great. And I just kind of feel like we're clicking right now. And you're equating all the feelings you're feeling as if it's like them that you're feeling this way, like they're the one kind of stuff. This is just off a hand holding now. And he goes on to say, actually, it's not them that you're responding to because you don't know really them well enough yet. What you're actually confused by is the very idea that someone's holding your hand and how much you love that. How much you love finding that someone finds your hand worth holding in public. And how enjoyable that is to be loved. For someone to publicly say, I am with them, which is you. I say this because physical intimacy has an increasing level of transparency and vulnerability that in one sense is greatly enjoyable, another sense can be very, very confusing and if not destructive to a meaningful, honorable relationship. And that's why I say to interact with people as a brother and sister that you're not sure to be married with. And that's so different for a lot of people because a lot of people have had sex before, and they activate those old desires and they kind of like, they don't know what to do there. And that's why you want to maintain a lot of accountability and not a lot of privacy if that's a common temptation. I do want to say this about sexual desire. For a man and a woman, either one of you who have sexual desires, going back to 1 Corinthians 7, you can interpret that sexual desire as like an alarm bell that God is not intending you to maintain your singleness indefinitely, that God wants you to pursue maturity so that you have an expression for that to be acted out in the context of marriage. Now, not to treat marriage selfishly, but to say that. And I say this because if you can back up the time clock on teenagers who are like kissing for the first time and they're having sex and they're touching each other kind of thing, and they're like, oh, what's going on? They're like, okay, you have just wrongly understood. That was like a warning bell where God's like, listen, you need to grow up and get ready for adulthood, to be ready for a relationship beyond being able to be physically intimate. Physically intimate is easy. Dogs do that on the street. That's not hard. Hard is a sacrificial, meaningful relationship where you die to yourself and you think of another's interest before your own. And that starts with their integrity, which you want to preserve and why you do not want to violate them at all physically and bother that conscience before the Lord. You're up.
Okay, I like this question. How do you speak about an ex within community? How much detail is too much? Look around the room. There's a big group here. We're doing a dating series, so we're assuming some dating is going to happen in the future here. So being mindful of that whole talk you just gave, and you said it in all of your other talks, treating one another like a brother and a sister means that you don't talk bad about them to your other brothers and sisters. Like, your brothers and sisters are supposed to have your back. They're supposed to love you, be forgiving, patient, kind. So I think if there's been a tangle in relationships within a church community, and that happens all the time, you just need to be really careful. And back to the praying joke, like, oh, you heard so-and-so, we need to pray for them. Okay, well, yeah, you need to pray for them, but what's the purpose of you needing to tell somebody something about someone that you dated? If you think about that in that moment, like if you are that person asking that question or you have done it before, I would tell so-and-so this. Why do you need to tell them that? What's going to come of that? That often gets to the root of whether you're asking for help or counsel or you're gossiping, which obviously we don't want to gossip. So, I think you just be really tender and gentle. And again, the premise of that question is why we want to get before this conversation in dating, is because we would love an ideal world where there are no problems like that within the church. But that's not the ideal sinless world that we live in, so we're trying to minimize that as much as possible. Is that fine?
It's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna put a couple of these together. Should physical attraction be a consideration and how important is romance. So let me say this. Physical attraction is a valid consideration. I mean, you see in the book of Song of Solomon, Solomon delighted in his wife with like the weirdest metaphors, but he really delighted in her. That was super meaningful back then. Like today we're like, wait, what's this about the deer? But he really enjoyed her. And so I think that physical attraction is fine. The problem is when you make it a primary point of interest. And let me just say this. Proverbs 31 verse 30 says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. What you'll interestingly find out is that godliness is attractive in such a way that it actually changes even how you look at people. You trade in a worldly view of features for something that's more substantial. Doesn't mean you become blind to features. It just means you see beyond just the significance of that. So you're not fleshly. Tying that to romance. Anything you want to add on that before I talk about the romance?
No, I'll do it at the end.
On the romance, is romance important? What's the place of romance in a relationship? Man, romance is enjoyable. It's a gift from the Lord as a way to appreciate and show thoughtfulness to each other. Increasingly to doing that in the context of an exclusive relationship becomes more enjoyable. So the romance that I have with my wife is different than the romance I had with her when she was my girlfriend. And I say this because romance is an expression, as I've just said, expression of Philippians 2, considering others more important than yourself, and how to really put thoughtfulness into action. And so I enjoy romancing my wife. The problem is you can put too much emphasis on romance or no emphasis on romance, two extremes. So you could say, I'm just not a romantic person. I think what you're probably saying without realizing is you're just a selfish person. Because you're not, it's not really what are you a romantic person? It's like, is the other person a romantic person? Would they like to be romanced? Well, that requires some thoughtfulness. Because like, man, what do you like? What playlist are you looking forward to? What does that look like for you? Or perhaps you're saying, oh, I'm all about romance. I'm all about romance. Well, then the problem is you're all about romance. You are potentially dangerously thinking wrongly about something that's very emotive, very sensory in feeling. I'm just feeling love. I'm just enjoying this moment. I'm thinking, okay, you're just going to have to wake up in the reality that marriage is not just like riding from like one amazing date to another. That's often a myth, for example, in sex. You know, people can think, oh, like really biblical sex is like, you know, like everything is amazing. I was reading doing some discipleship with the guy recently about just broken sexuality and talking about things just because of some issues with abuse and stuff. And one of the things that the author's putting forward was a realistic view of sex is the reality that it's often like food. We are sustained by it, we enjoy it, but not every food is like, this is the most amazing dish I have ever had my entire life until tomorrow's dish. It just doesn't work that way. But you're so messed up, I'm so messed up because sex is put to us in the context of movies and sensationalism and pornography. It's totally messed up. Well, to take the sex out of it, I'm just talking about the romance part of it, sometimes chick flicks can really mess with you and how you think about people. And I want to just caution in that. What would my wife say to this?
Chick flicks. I'd like a raise of hands of all the guys that are home on the weekends watching chick flicks. Nobody's hands are up. Okay.
They might be. You might be trying to figure out what girls like.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think the only thing I would add to the romance attraction thing is I know of couples that are super happily married with children that said yes to a date when they were not attracted to that person at first glance. Because the date was really a friendship thing, getting to know them before it was a date. And I'm talking like physically attracted. So like I can think of this one story of a gal that had never been with anyone before, had never even kissed a guy, and she didn't particularly find this guy attractive, but they became friends. They started getting to know each other. The more she heard, the more she liked. And then I remember her coming to me and saying, Danelle, like he just touches my neck. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. And I'm like, is it just me, or is this funny that you're having this conversation? Because before she would be like, nope, I don't want to date him, not interested, whatever, you know. But then this friendship started, and that intimacy or that romance or that attraction can come. So don't close things down. Obviously, you don't want to think somebody's gross. Like if Eric never brushed his teeth, that would have probably been a deal breaker for me, right? But, you know, I wanted someone with long, flowy hair, and you're okay there? I'm kidding. But, yeah, just, yeah, like Isaac, don't let that be a reason why you would say no to an otherwise, 10 other things on your list are being checked. Does that make sense?
Yes. All right. Is it okay, next question, is it okay for a guy and a girl to hang out as just friends? If they're just friends, does a conversation need to be had? If so, how do you do that without it being awkward? And the next question is, how do I make sure my friendship with someone of the opposite sex is being perceived as just that? I'm going to kind of put these together and comment on this. So again, I just want to say, I think it is good and right for guys and girls to be friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. It's that it's just so uncommon in the world, and because we sometimes bring the immaturity of the world into the church, that we think it always has to mean something. And this is where we want to grow up and mature some. This is where we want to kind of like, okay, it doesn't have to mean that. We'll get to the details of how you can do that. But it's like, have categories for this. Go back to what I was saying 2 weeks ago about this idea of how you interact together and serve each other and enjoy each other. And it doesn't have to mean anything. And just, now the question comes, how do I make sure that this friend knows that I just mean it as a friend? Or the second question is, how do I know that others know that we're just friends? Okay, the first question, it's appropriate to still DTR the friendship. To not leave somebody sort of wondering like, oh, this is something unique and distinct here. What? Listen, I just want to. I sometimes get asked this question if you and I or something. And I just want you to know what my answer is. I really enjoy you as a sister, and that's not like some like low key like way of like. I was like just enjoy I just enjoy the friendship. I just want to make sure that you understand that, and thank you for just these times we're enjoying together. And she knows that, and she feels the same way. And if she doesn't feel the same way, then you're like, okay, I think we're gonna probably talk about what that means. You don't want to visit that. So that's one thing to do. You're kind of detouring each other, and you're detouring with others. Now, having said that, my wife and I were friends, and only friends, for a year. Almost all of that year, we never thought we'd be dating. She had different tastes than what I had to offer. Fair? She wanted to marry a very tall guy, and I'm only 3 inches taller than she is. She was interested in all things country. I don't know anything about country. I don't intend to know anything about country. And other types of just kind of preferences kind of category. So it was great that we just got to each other's friends because she wasn't interested in me, I wasn't interested in her, but I had never just met a young woman who loved Jesus, actually had decent family, and served in the church. I just thought she was really just cool. And so I hung out with her as a chance to get to know her family as well. I just really were friends and just enjoyed it. And people thought oh, so you're kind of you're together. I was like, no. I would never. She would never. No, we would not. No. And you felt the same way, yes? And so the beautiful thing about that, till the end, the beautiful thing about that was that we could get to know each other without the distraction of romance, because this is the problem. When you begin a relationship with romance, you're having to back up into a friendship and see how far you can go. If you go too far with romance quickly, you're often clouded by what you learn about the friendship that you don't enjoy. That if it was just a friendship and not romance, you would know, oh, we probably shouldn't be in a dating relationship. I just wouldn't be. They could be a godly person. They're just not for us. We're not to be together. The problem is when you start with romance and you back up into friendship, you can make the relationship an idol pretty quickly. So God thankfully protected us from that, which is very unusual. I recognize that. We got to each other as friends. And then towards the end of that year, we started dating, which is a whole other side story that half of you know, some of you don't. I'm not going to get into it. But I was super nervous because I thought so wonderful. I thought of her so wonderfully. I thought, man, whoever she marries will just like, oh wow, what an amazing guy as far as a girl that she'll get. Let me reword that. What an amazing catch that guy will get if he gets to marry her. I never thought it'd be me. Once we started dating, I knew dating meant towards marriage, and I got really super nervous. And that's another story for another time. All right. Which one do you want to answer?
Well, the next one in line, how long do I need to be ready? Wait, how long of a time do I need to be ready after a breakup to date again?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's no Bible verse for that. And it's hard to put a number on that, but I think it depends on what the breakup was like. Were you intimate? That's going to need to be talked through because you're going to have scars from that. Is it someone that you're going to see again regularly at church? That's going to be awkward. You might need to work through forgiveness issues. How far along were you in each other's families? Like Eric was really closely tied to my family at that point. I'm sure if we would have broken up, that would have been not only awkward for me, but like all of my family members because he was over all the time. But that said, obviously you can heal from that and then date again. I think the best thing to do in that scenario is to ask someone who knows you well, because there is a thing called rebound dating, right? Everybody knows that. So you don't want to do that, but you also don't want to, say I'm never dating again. So it's somewhere in that sweet spot. But I think people that know you well, which is why being a part of the body of Christ is so important and living in community, people that know you well can then say, hey, I've seen you work through this. And, maybe you ask somebody, put that out there for them, like, hey, I'm interested in dating again. Do you think I'm ready? Like, that's a brave question to ask. If I knew you, I'd have some thoughts, if I knew you well, because you're wanting to protect you from another potential problematic relationship, right?
You're awesome. I got to marry her. I'm going to put a couple of these together. What do we need to agree on theologically? What if there are political differences and our preference is sinful? So, sure. So preferences are not sinful unless you make them sinful. So having desire for my wife was not sinful for having a preference of marrying a 6 foot whatever guy. It would have been sinful if she's like, I am not marrying unless I find this. Because then she's making that an ultimate thing that God's like, that's exceeding what the Bible has said. So I don't think preferences make you sinful. You're like, oh, I like this or I like that. But I will say you need to be careful making preferences of a greater priority than they should be. So I come, for example, from a very athletic family. Mom athletic, dad athletic. They did triathlons before I did triathlons, soccer, swimming, everything, you name it. My wife does not come from an athletic family. Mom didn't do that, dad didn't do that, she didn't do any sports. I just assumed that I would date somebody who came from that background. And we would do triathlons together, and we would do we'd climb mountains together, and that would just be something we would do. And I would go so far as just saying, not only did I assume that, I would say that would have been my preferences. When I met Danelle, it was not like that for her. When I met Danelle, those preferences began to fade because I realized that was not going to be the sum and substance of a meaningful marriage. That we could still enjoy different things that are contradicting or that could complement one another, but not necessarily be the exact same as each other. So I don't think preferences are sinful. But let me speak to some matters specifically that can be points of division. The one question is asked is about what if we have differences in political ideology? I want to say this. Proverbs speaks repeatedly about strife in households. So you need to be very aware of that and say, listen, I don't think we're putting ourselves in a good place for the future that we would otherwise just have constant low-grade to high-grade strife. So that's at one level. At a more important level is where are we theologically? So what does this person think about the Bible? What do they think about baptism? What do they think about the church? What do they think about any number of important doctrines? God's sovereignty. There are people, good, godly people, who disagree on those things. And we're all going to be in heaven together, faith alone, Christ alone, because of his grace alone. Disagreeing on baptism, disagreeing on doctrines of Calvinism versus Arminianism. But recognizing when you desire to be in a relationship, you want to find there to be levels of theological alignment that's a complement, not a continued source of conflict. Especially for a man, if he is supposed to lead his household, lead his family, lead his wife, disciple her, and she is repeatedly disagreeing with him, rejecting him, arguing with him, then I would just say before they ever should continue further in a dating relationship, that they should just say, hey, this is probably a point we should just not be together in a relationship. Doesn't make you ungodly, doesn't make you unloving. You're just saying, I think we're putting ourselves in a position for continued strife in the future, and that's just not good and wise. That does not mean that you have to now pass out theological surveys when you start dating each other on your first date. Like, can you mind answering this 100-question thing for me, please? And then how your results are will determine if I say yes to date 2. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying at the same time, don't place no value on this. I know a lot of couples just like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like a pastor thing, right? Like, I mean, they say Jesus, I said Jesus. They own a Bible, I own a Bible. They said they're going to go to church with me. You're like, okay, you're just incredibly naive. And I just want to help disciple you to think more biblically about that.
I would just add to that. I've counseled some gals. You don't want to be discipling your boyfriend. If you find yourself doing that in your dating relationship, you're going to be doing that in your marriage, and that means you're not letting him lead the home. You're having to lead the home because of what he doesn't know. Now, again, I think it's super important what you said earlier. You cannot expect to marry a 26-year-old guy that, is wrapped in a 46-year-old mind, you know what I mean, as far as everything that they know and all the life experiences. You're not going to get that. That's part of, we were not the Danelle and Eric now that we were in our 20s. But if you find yourself pushing that conversation constantly, that might be something just to have on the radar list as a potential yellow flag, not necessarily red. But again, I know some new Christian guys that are hungry for God's word, and they are loving every ounce of information they're getting. Those are the guys that might, though they are newly saved, they might outpace you because of their love for the Lord and the excitement of being in his word. So in that case, awesome. Go for those, those kinds of scenarios.
There's one of these that you were going to read and tell a story about.
Oh, okay. I have a story. Don't judge me.
Read the question.
When someone asks you why you're rejecting them, what do you say if it might be hurtful? So I did not know how bad this was going to be when I did it. I clearly didn't think it through. There was a guy in our neighborhood when I was in high school. I was 9th grade. He was a senior. He lived around the corner, and he would write me love notes. And I think I was just super naive because they made me very uncomfortable. And he would give them to my brother or leave them in my locker, and they would be like super gushy, weird. Like, I saw you coming around the corner today, and you were just beautiful, and your hair was flowing, like weird. And I'm like, okay, poor guy. If you're listening, David, his name was David. I'm sorry. He was freaking me out so bad, and I did not know how to end this because he lived around the corner. So then he started coming and giving my brother the notes to give to me. And I was like, okay, this has got to stop. So I called him in my house one day when he came over. My parents were upstairs. I said, Mom and Dad, can you come down here real quick? They had no idea what I was doing. I sat him on the stool, and I said, David, I have my parents here because I would like to tell you that I do not appreciate your notes. I do not like you, and I don't want you to ever write me another note again. Have I been clear? And my parents are looking at me like, oh my gosh, this poor guy, we feel so bad for him. So don't do that. I'd be a little gentler than that. But you also don't want to lie at the same time. So to seriously answer the question, this is why it's so much easier to do this in a friendship. Because these things get normally shaken out in a friendship. If you're just both have, if you're both athletic and you love playing soccer and everything, but you're on completely different political sides, well, you're not going to be in different rooms watching the two major news sources of that and never sitting in the same living room. You got to think through those kinds of things. But if you do those kinds of conversations in friendship, then you don't have the big awkward, now I got to tell them that I'm not interested when we've had all these wonderful times together.
And next week, I'll speak more to categories that you think through, questions you ask when you're dating, kind of make an assessment of and kind of learn about each other. But to get to this question about how do I basically reject, when someone asks you why you're rejecting them, what do you say if it might be hurtful? I think you're responsible for what you say and how you say it. You're not responsible for how they receive it. So the significance to that point, just 1 second, the significance to that point is you are called to speak truthfully and lovingly. Now, to be more specific, you're welcome to say, to give us a hypothetical scenario, very kind of you, this time that we've had together, I've enjoyed getting to know some things about you. I can clearly see evidence of grace, whatever it might be, points of encouragement. But as I've gotten to know you, I just don't think, for where I'm at right now, or where you're at right now, I just don't think it's a good idea for us to continue in this dating relationship. Now, the person might push back and say, well, why? And with the intention to either learn so they can address that themselves privately on their own after the relationship, or with the intention to debate and hopefully get you to change your mind. The first one, you can decide if you want to give a little bit more information to explain so as to help them. The second one, you need to just recognize no matter what you say, it's going to be very hard for them, and they're already processing emotionally this rejection, which is why they're coming back to you. So speak the truth in love. You don't have to be exhaustive. Well, when you did this, remember you said this, I didn't like this, or this kind of thing like this. So you want to do that in a way that is gracious. And then, if you are the one being broken up with, it can be very painful. It can be overwhelmingly emotional. But let me ask you to consider the alternative. Is the alternative for someone to stay in a relationship with you who doesn't want to be? Because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Now we're going to ask them to participate in a false narrative, to be an actor in a play that's not reality. You don't want that. Now, I'm not saying it makes it easy, and you're going to have to largely process where the Lord is doing in your heart and what he's doing in the context of community, people who love you and care for you, who you've been seeking with counsel with already, who've been interacting with you about this context for accountability, et cetera, and just leave that to the Lord. So the problem with dating is they don't all lead to marriage. The problem with dating is because a lot of them don't lead to marriage is you often get very hurt. And so that's why some people just don't want to date at all. So I just say that to just encourage you.
To link this question onto what you're saying, how do you address a relationship that you may have led someone beyond the pace of friendship into a premature implication of a dating interest? I would say take this opportunity to be sitting in a dating class and say, hey, after hearing what I've heard, I thought I was ready to date and I was interested in you maybe, but I've realized, I've got some things that I need to address or talk to someone about or whatever. And so you use this time now to maybe reset that relationship. Not to say that you can't ever date and maybe it would be your future spouse, who knows, but to kind of hit the reset button to say, ooh, maybe I jumped the gun a little bit and I need to work on myself first.
This next question is a really insightful question, and I commend whoever's asking it and others of you to consider it. How do I know I actually like someone versus the idea of someone? This is a really good question because it's getting at this idea of loneliness as a potential motive of why you're with someone, and that you're liking them because you're just liking that as a better alternative than loneliness. The other way to kind of audit this is to ask the question, am I liking this person shown by my interest in them and my desire to serve them and be with them? I'm not saying have we had fun stories, have we had like a good meal, have we watched a good movie, have we had a laughter? Like just be in society, like with people. You're going to have those kind of moments if you're like somewhat normal human. But the idea as you continue to get to know them, kind of back this developing relationship, am I really enjoying them the more I get to know them? That does not mean like, wow, they're just increasingly perfect. But I will say this, being in a dating relationship gives you a chance to watch people process life. And what do you see when you see them do that? When they lose a job, when they have a hard day, when they're having a panic attack, when they got in a fight with their roommate, when they're really struggling with their idea of their dad, when they're wondering if God loves them, when they feel like they're not pretty enough and they just cannot compete with Miami's pulsating sexuality. Those moments, what you learn about them and how you respond to them, says a lot about whether or not you're enjoying getting to know them, and that's also a lot about to them of how much they're enjoying getting to know you and how you respond to these things about them. So it's a balance in that sense. Okay.
Did that one.
The stop one we did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A few more, then just a couple more, then we're done.
Those are kind of similar.
How many details are too many details about someone's past? When should you know all the details about someone's past? When you're already married? And should I tell a person I'm dating about specific people I've dated, and do they need a list? It's a good question. And the spiritual level one I've asked for. So we're going to let this be the last, and then I'm going to end this here. So here is the reality for most people, but not all people. Some people have never been on a date until they go on one with you. They've never had a boyfriend or a girlfriend until you became their boyfriend or girlfriend. And that's just very rare, but can be very beautiful. Others of us have had lots of dates before, maybe had lots of boyfriends or girlfriends before. Others of us who maybe had those kind of boyfriends or girlfriends, maybe not had lots of boyfriends and girlfriends, we've maybe even have had sex, and maybe had even not just had sex, maybe had some really even more worse experiences. So the question is, when we come into this new relationship, how much do I sort of tell this person, like, here's my relational resume? Not as like to commend me, but to maybe caution you against me. This goes to the application of intimacy and how much transparency you offer. There are some kind of basic factual things like, hey, you know, have you had a girlfriend before? You had a boyfriend before? And hopefully someone's not asking that because you look like you don't know what you're doing. But they might be asking that. I think in the beginning you need to recognize the fact that it's appropriate to be generically honest, generically where you let them know if you've been married before, they learn that about you. If you've dated before, they learn that about you. How many girlfriends, how many boyfriends does not change by the number unless they themselves have some preference. I won't date anybody who's had more than 4 boyfriends. Well, then we should probably end now because I've had 5. There are some people who have kind of like subjective preferences. But I do think there's a place where that kind of level of honesty and confession comes later as to who, how much, how long. But the details will not change the quality of the current relationship you have now. So sometimes out of fear I could think of this, for example, with a woman, but I also think of this with a guy. I remember talking to a guy, a non-Christian friend. He was dating this girl. He'd been dating this girl for about 6 months. Somehow 6 months in this relationship, like some switch turned on for him. He started imagining her previous boyfriends, which she had had, and it overwhelmed him, this paralysis by analysis. He kept thinking about how she was probably comparing him to his previous boyfriends in any number of ways, and it was wrecking him because of his fear and insecurity. I've seen the same thing with girls. In the context of a Christian relationship, the concern can be like, man, I had really hoped that I was going to marry a virgin and you're not. And I'm trying to get my mind around what it's like to have sex with somebody who's already had sex with somebody else or many other people before having sex with me. And am I okay with that? Does that change the vision of what I thought about on my wedding night? For some people, that's a challenge for them. Other people, it's a chance to practice forgiveness, patience, graciousness, and a sense of humility as we're not being judgmental towards each other, but saying, look how this person is honoring the Lord. So we're not walking in naively, we're walking in honestly and with reality, but to the details, I never think the details are going to help the relationship. It'll just fuel more fear and more questions. Last word on that.
The only other thing I would add is, obviously, yes, you do need to talk about those details, not the details, but the specifics at some point. But I would say I've also seen relationships where two people that have struggled with a number of things start dating and they basically vomit it all out, and then they struggle with purity, the both of them, because they know that the both of them has either been with a lot of people in the past or struggled with pornography, and so they end up confessing something that they don't want to continue, but then when they know that about each other, then that becomes a new temptation within their relationship. And it goes back to that emotional intimacy. You've shared so much so fast that now you feel super connected and you're alike and all of these things, and then it actually ends up taking a turn for the worst. That's
okay. Let me just say, so much more could be said on this lesson. We have one more next week, and I'm already feeling like, man, there's so much stuff I'm leaving on the cutting floor. But understand overall, my desire as your pastor, if you're at Grace Church, my desire as your pastor is to help you, both publicly like I'm doing now and then privately. So feel free. You can always come up and ask Danelle any questions, ask me any questions. We are here for you. We really do care for you, really do love you. Do not want you to kind of wander around the streets of Miami clueless on how to think through relationships in light of the scriptures.